Hi everyone, my name is Kimberly, and first and foremost, I wanted to apologize for my appearance on this video. I've been dealing with a bit of an infection the last few days on top of a back injury, so I'm just kind of rolling with the punches tonight. But for my student group, I interviewed first generation students working in financial aid. This has always been a group that has been on our radar, at least at Rice University. And a couple years ago, I actually got to sit in on a first generation student panel, so to speak. And after listening to their questions and their concerns, it was just really eye opening. And ever since then, I've just been really passionate about this particular group of students and helping understand and meet their needs. Most students are lucky enough to have parents who have been through this process, or at least one parent who has, so they don't go into college navigating this transition blindly. These students don't necessarily have that. Even if they do have parents who are involved, which they do plenty of times, those parents still don't have the personal experience and the personal advice to pass on to them. So I think it's important for people to remember that this group of students might have a different or harder time transitioning to college life, but that doesn't mean that they can't be successful. They just need a little more hands-on guidance to help them get there. So with these interviews, one of the first things I noticed was that both of the students I interviewed shared a feeling of accomplishment for beating the odds. They both at some point used a variation of the term beating the odds. So I thought that was really interesting because unfortunately the odds are stacked against them. First generation students do have worse outcomes than second, third, fourth generation students. So that was interesting that both of these students kind of shared that connection of having that specifically be something that they were proud of. There were a lot of interesting differences that I found in their interviews, though. So, one student really emphasized the importance of connecting with others like you, and she talked about how crucial those connections were to her, and emphasized multiple times how it's just in human nature to do better when you're connecting with others who are like you. The other student specifically said that she didn't have a preference. She acknowledged that she appreciated those connections when they happened, but it wasn't a clear priority for her. Another interesting difference was that one student mentioned how common she felt being a first generation student was, so the connections for her weren't really on that level as much as they were on for her racial identity. And the other student felt that being first generation was more something she was proud of that set her apart. So I thought that was interesting that one student didn't even really feel like a minority in that sense, whereas the other student felt like she was kind of singled out as a first generation student, but in a good way. She was proud of it. Another interesting difference was that both students did make it clear how important student engagement and resources to these students on campus is, but in completely different ways. So one student mentioned that she had a really hard time navigating things like the financial aid process, and she kind of ended up costing herself a lot of money because she wasn't familiar with the process. And she said if there were resources for students like her on campus, she had no idea because they really weren't advertised. And she said that she doesn't remember a single time being asked by a student affairs professional if she was first generation. And all that really surprised and upset me because of how much we talk about that in my office. So that was upsetting to me to hear of an institution that was not conducting that kind of outreach at all. The other student said that she wished she had gotten involved sooner and that they did a great job with that outreach and with that advertising, and she was very aware of all those programs. She just didn't get involved until later. So they both in my mind, came to this conclusion of how important those resources are for students, but they came from completely different experiences. So clearly, some schools are still very behind in conducting the appropriate outreach and providing the right resources for these students, and that is something important that we need to remember as student affairs professionals. So, as far as what we have covered in class, I think it's hard to say whether or not I felt like anything was proven or disproven because their experiences were so different. And even so, it's only two students, and it's hard to generalize based on two students' experiences. But the one thing I will say again is how important student engagement and outreach and making sure different student groups are available for students like first generation students is. We really need to be promoting those resources, and I really hope that if there's anything you take away from this is that next time that you are in a situation where you're counseling or giving guidance to a student, this is an important factor to consider. It is okay to ask if they are a first generation student. They might not know that that is relevant to the help that you can give them, but it can really end up making a difference in the end. So I hope that you've learned something today, and I hope that you go and conduct your own research and really keep this in mind for your future experience with your students. Thank you.